It's 11:07 p.m. Lightning is flashing in the sky, and Korean Air Flight 631 has already made 2 approach attempts. But due to low runway visibility and wind shear, it failed to land both times. Now the plane is making its 3rd approach towards runway 22 at Cebu Airport, but this time the situation is even worse than before. The aircraft's right main landing gear may be damaged. There's a suspected leak in the hydraulic system, the anti-skid system and auto brakes are not functioning, and now even the alternate braking system has failed. The spoilers won't deploy, the thrust reversers won't work, and the scariest part is that the pilots don't even know if the landing gear has properly extended or not. The lives of 173 people are now in the hands of an airplane whose safety systems are failing one by one. This 3rd approach is the final chance for everyone on board. Will Flight 631 be able to land safely on the runway, or will a seemingly minor weather issue lead to a major disaster? Let's find out in today's video. Evening of October 23rd, 2022. Korean Air Flight 631 is ready to depart on its scheduled route, which is from Seoul Incheon Airport in South Korea to Cebu International Airport in the Philippines. The aircraft being used for the flight is an Airbus A330, a 24-year-old but reliable plane, still widely used by airlines around the world. And in the cockpit are 2 experienced pilots. The captain is 52 years old with a total of 13,000 hours of flying experience, 9,200 of which are on the A330. He knows this plane extremely well. The first officer is 37 years old with 1,600 total flight hours, including 1,000 hours on the A330. He may not be as experienced as the captain, but he is well acquainted with the aircraft. Including 162 passengers and 11 crew members, there are 173 people on board. Everything seems completely normal before departure. The dispatch papers are in order, there are no issues in the technical log, and the weather forecast indicates possible light thunderstorms by the time they reach Cebu. The runway's ILS, instrument landing system, is not working, so the pilots have planned for an RNP approach. ILS provides radio signals from both sides of the runway to help the plane land at the correct angle and alignment. But when ILS isn't available, pilots use an RNP approach, which relies on GPS and onboard computer systems to guide the aircraft precisely. It's more challenging because guidance comes only from satellites, without any ground-based signals. At this point, everything seems under control. At 6:05 p.m., Flight 631 aligns on the runway and takes off within seconds. The sky is clear, the engines are running smoothly, and everything in the cockpit appears routine. But at that very moment, something has been triggered inside the aircraft. Something the pilots can't feel, and no computer can detect. No one knows that hidden deep inside the aircraft's hydraulic brake system is a very small malfunction. In fact, the Airbus A330 has 2 brake systems. The first is the normal braking system, connected to the green hydraulic system. The second is the alternate braking system, which operates through the blue hydraulic system. If one of these systems fails, the other one automatically takes over. But in this aircraft, the alternate brake system has a faulty pressure release valve, PRV. This valve has a microscopic leak, extremely tiny, due to which the brake accumulator pressure is slowly leaking. Now the problem is that the leak is internal. The fluid isn't escaping outside, so there's no warning in the cockpit, and nothing shows up in the maintenance records. This leak may have existed for years, but it was never noticed, and no alarms ever went off. But today, this very leak is about to cause a major disaster. Around 10:30 p.m., Flight 631 has now reached over the city of Cebu in the Philippines. There's turbulence in the air and lightning is flashing intensely within the storm clouds, just as the weather forecast had predicted. Before beginning the approach, the ATC sends a message stating that Runway 04 is currently active, so the crew begins preparing for an RNP approach accordingly. The ILS system is already out of service, so they'll now have to rely entirely on the onboard GPS and terrain mapping. The aircraft gradually begins its descent. Passing through clouds, the runway lights begin to appear in the distance. Everything is going according to plan, until suddenly a massive downpour appears directly in front of the approach path. Because of that, visibility vanishes completely, and the runway becomes entirely obscured. The captain immediately decides to initiate a go-around. Thrust is increased, the nose is pulled up, and the aircraft, which had been descending, climbs back into the sky from a height of just 275 feet. The cabin crew is informed about the go-around. The passengers, too, are a bit anxious, but everything is still under control. The crew begins preparing for another approach. But just then, ATC gives a new instruction. The wind direction has changed, so now Runway 22 is active. Both pilots quickly conduct a new approach briefing, change the heading, and turn the aircraft towards Runway 22. And this is where the most dangerous phase of this flight begins. The weather has now worsened even more. The wind is strong, and the clouds are constantly shifting. On final approach, the captain disconnects the autopilot to manually guide the aircraft. But then, a sudden strong turbulence jolts the aircraft. The wind pattern keeps changing. First a crosswind, then a tailwind, and suddenly a strong downdraft. The captain tries to control the plane. He raises the nose, then lowers it, but the aircraft's vertical descent rate is now unstable. The plane is currently at an altitude of 300 feet, and due to the strong wind and turbulence, it's slipping below its designated glide path. For reference, the glide path is the straight path that helps a plane descend towards a runway at the correct angle and speed. Now the aircraft is going below the glide path, which means that if a quick correction isn't made, it could hit the ground before reaching the runway. The first officer is keeping a close eye on the instruments. The altitude is rapidly dropping. 250 feet, 200 feet, 150 feet. The sink rate has become dangerously high, and there are now only a few seconds left before the aircraft reaches the runway. At 75 feet, the first officer shouts loudly, "Sink rate, go around!" The captain immediately increases thrust, pulling the side stick back so the plane can climb again. But the aircraft is already too low. Before anyone can react, the plane's main landing gear hits the ground. But the touchdown doesn't happen on the smooth part of the runway. It happens right at the runway's starting edge, where there's a raised step about 15 centimeters high between the grass and the concrete. The right main gear hits this spot, and a violent jolt spreads throughout the aircraft structure. The impact is so strong that the internal structure of the landing gear breaks apart. The brake assembly, hydraulic lines, and several sensors are also damaged. But still, no alarms go off in the cockpit. There's nothing to indicate to the pilots that any damage has occurred. The plane bounces slightly, then lifts back into the air again. From the outside, the go-around looks completely successful. But no one knows how severely damaged the aircraft has just become internally. And this damage is now going to become the real cause of the upcoming disaster. For now, the aircraft is returned to the sky, and both pilots appear calm in the cockpit. They begin preparing for another approach. But just then, as soon as the aircraft passes 1,500 feet, the cockpit's electronic centralized aircraft monitor, ECAM, suddenly starts flashing multiple warning messages, one after the other. The first message appears: landing gear control and interface unit 1 and 2 failure. Then landing gear unsafe, followed by normal brake fault, and then anti-skid fault. The first officer quickly opens a checklist and starts reading through the messages. Both LGCIUs, which monitor the landing gear's position and status, are now showing malfunctions. This means the aircraft now can't even confirm whether its landing gear is properly deployed or not. The RPM sensors on the landing gear, which indicate whether the wheels are spinning, have also broken in the crash impact. Because of this, the anti-skid system has completely failed. Now the brakes are functioning only through the alternate hydraulic system, which relies on the blue hydraulic circuit. Safety layers like auto brakes and anti-skid are no longer available. The captain is concerned, but he still doesn't realize that these brakes will soon become their biggest challenge. Meanwhile, fuel consumption is rising rapidly because the landing gear is still down and can't be retracted. Normally, after takeoff, the gear is pulled up to reduce drag and save fuel. But at this point, the gear sensors are broken, and the system can't figure out whether the gear should retract or not. As a result, the gear is stuck in the down position. And no one in the cockpit notices this small detail. ECAM now displays another fault: thrust reverser system failure. The system only activates thrust reversers when it receives signals from the sensors indicating that the aircraft is on the ground. But that signal isn't being received now, so the reversers will remain locked. Not just that, the weight on wheel sensors, which indicate whether the plane is on the ground or not, were also damaged during the crash impact. Because of this, another critical system, the spoilers, won't deploy either. The spoilers reduce lift after touchdown and shift the plane's full weight onto the wheels, making braking more effective. But unless the system receives a ground contact signal, they will not deploy. Right now, the aircraft is flying normally. There's no uncontrollable situation, but internally, all backup systems are failing, one after another. What the pilots are seeing in the cockpit are individual warnings that don't appear to be connected, but in reality, they're all linked to one root cause. That brief touchdown has shattered the entire backbone of the aircraft's braking system. The pilots still believe they have alternate braking available, but they are completely unaware of the real danger ahead. After the second go-around, Flight 631 is now circling the skies above Cebu. There's a slight sense of panic and tension in the cockpit because the warnings keep coming, and the pilots no longer trust any system entirely. With ATC clearance, the aircraft is directed towards a waypoint called ALMAR. The captain decides that from this point onward, everything will be handled slowly and methodically. The first officer initiates the gravity gear extension procedure, a system used when hydraulic or electrical systems fail. It allows the landing gear to drop manually using gravity, ensuring it can deploy no matter what. A few seconds after activation, 3 green lights should appear on the cockpit panel, 1 for the nose gear and 2 for the main gears. These green lights confirm that the landing gear is fully locked and ready for landing. Now the green light for the left main gear and nose gear turn on, meaning those two have deployed safely. But the right main gear's light doesn't turn on. This means either the gear didn't open or its sensor is damaged and unable to send the signal. The captain asks the first officer, "Why didn't the gear come down?" The first officer replies, "Only one light is missing. The other gears are showing down, but I can't say for sure." Understanding the situation, the captain decides to declare an emergency. On the radio he says, "Mayday, mayday, mayday, Korean 631, landing gear unsafe. We're making an emergency landing. Please prepare." ATC immediately understands the situation and starts prepping emergency support. Meanwhile, the captain informs the cabin crew via intercom that the aircraft is making an emergency landing and to prepare for the brace command. The first officer reads the next steps from the checklist. One critical step states that whichever side has the damaged or unsafe landing gear, its engine must be shut down immediately after touchdown to reduce the risk of fire or fuel leak upon ground impact. The captain also contacts Korean's Air Maintenance Control Center. He relays the full list of faults and asks for guidance on the best course of action in this situation. The first officer carefully follows the emergency landing checklist for an unsafe gear scenario. Now everything in the cockpit is under manual control. No automatic system is assisting the pilots. For the next 15 minutes, the captain and first officer continuously discuss the remaining options. Eventually, they decide that one final approach will be made. If that also fails, they will divert to Davao. Davao's weather is slightly better at the moment, but its runway is shorter than Cebu's. So even that decision involves risk. But it's the most practical option right now. Now only one last attempt remains. Either this flight will land successfully, or the story will take a completely different turn. Flight 631 turns towards final approach from the ALMAR waypoint. Everything looks normal from the outside. But inside, all backup systems are failing one after another. The blue hydraulic system, which powers the alternate braking, is now rapidly draining. The leak in the PRV, pressure release valve, is causing hydraulic fluid to exit internally through the return line and fall out of the aircraft. That means the fluid is no longer circulating back into the reservoir, it's leaking out. In addition, the hydraulic accumulators, which store pressure for emergency braking, are also gradually losing power. The pilots still believe the alternate brakes are functional, but in reality the aircraft is now running on the last bit of emergency pressure. That final backup for braking is about to vanish. The warnings in the cockpit don't show the full picture. They indicate faults, but don't reveal that the brakes could fail completely at any moment. Regardless, the final approach has now begun. The aircraft is well positioned on the glide slope. Speed is controlled and visibility is better than before. 1,000. Meanwhile, in the cabin, the captain's calm and confident voice echoes. "This is your captain speaking. We're about to land. Please brace for impact." The crew announces brace position throughout the cabin and passengers are once again given safety instructions. The time is 11:07:39 p.m. The aircraft lands perfectly in the touchdown zone of runway 22. Speed and alignment are both ideal. The captain reduces engine power and attempts to deploy reverse thrust, but nothing works. The thrust reversers don't deploy. The spoilers also fail to activate because the aircraft's computers still don't believe the plane is on the ground. As mentioned before, the weight-on-wheel sensors were damaged in the crash, never sent the ground signal. Seeing this, the captain steps on the brake pedals, and for a few seconds the aircraft slows from 107 to 90 knots. But then, the brakes completely fail. The brake pedals go dead. They no longer respond to any input. For a brief moment, there is total silence in the cockpit. The first officer quickly opens the emergency checklist and begins preparing to shut down the right engine, as per procedure, since that's aside with the unsafe gear. But in the panic, he accidentally begins shutting down the left engine, which is functioning properly and is critical for controlling the aircraft. The captain yells, "Do not shut it off, not that one!" But it's too late. The first officer shuts down the left engine. Although it's restarted immediately, the plane is still racing uncontrollably towards the end of the runway. The captain shouts, "Speed's not reducing! No brake! No response!" The aircraft crosses the runway end at 83 knots. Rain-soaked grass and mud slow it down a little. But ahead lies something far more dangerous. First, the plane's nose gear hits a concrete slab, part of the approach light system. The impact is violent, and the nose gear collapses. The cockpit dips forward, scraping the ground. But the aircraft still doesn't stop. It then crashes into a metal localizer antenna structure. The entire structure flips over the aircraft and lands on top of the fuselage. Metal debris passes dangerously close to the cabin, but thankfully no major injuries occur. Finally, the aircraft comes to a halt about 235 meters past the runway, stuck in a muddy field, tilted, damaged, but somehow still in one piece. There is total silence in the cockpit and cabin. Then the captain gives the order, "Begin evacuation!" The front section is too damaged. L1 and R1 doors are unusable. Even some rear doors are too high off the ground or blocked by debris. Only one usable door remains, R2, and evacuation begins from there. The cabin crew immediately goes into action following their training. Passengers are evacuated in an orderly manner. First those near the exits and able to walk, then children, the elderly, and passengers needing assistance. Some emergency slides don't deploy fully, but there's no panic. The crew re-enters the cabin 4 times to check if anyone is left behind, unconscious or in a wheelchair. Throughout the evacuation, one thing is clear: the crew's discipline and calmness. Soon the entire evacuation is complete. All 173 people are safely out. Only 2 crew members and 15 passengers had minor injuries. No lives were lost. The aircraft was completely destroyed in the accident, but it was the cabin crew's training, awareness, and courage that ensured no lives were lost. That night, if anyone showed true heroism, it wasn't in the cockpit, it was the people standing in the cabin, the ones we often overlook. The next day, a detailed investigation began at Cebu Airport. Investigators photographed the wreckage, recovered data recorders, and began analyzing cockpit voice recordings. Within days, several key causes started to emerge. First, the microscopic PRV leak was identified. Hidden inside the aircraft for years, that leaky valve silently depleted the hydraulic accumulator pressure, drying out the emergency brakes. Then the short touchdown had caused such mechanical stress to the landing gear that sensors, brake manifolds, and hydraulic lines were broken. LGCIU systems failed, RPM sensors were damaged, and weight on wheels data became completely inaccurate. As a result, the thrust reversers and spoilers didn't activate, because the computer still thought the plane was airborne. And the biggest factor? 1 second. Investigators reported that if the pilots had decided to perform the second go-around just 1 second earlier, the aircraft wouldn't have touched down prematurely. The gear would have remained intact, the hydraulic system would have worked, and the accident might never have happened. The final report called it a chain reaction. Multiple minor issues linked together to create a scenario no single checklist could resolve. After the report was released, Airbus immediately reviewed the PRV design and updated the maintenance schedule. Additionally, they modified the trigger limits for hydraulic fuses and improved how the brake system operates under failure conditions. How many of you might be wondering, when Flight 631 was holding in the air, why didn't they divert to Davao, where the weather was slightly better? If they had, what would have happened? Well, there's one thing no one considered at that time: time. If the crew had gone to Davao, it would have taken about 30 more minutes to get there, and in that time, the blue hydraulic system would have been completely depressurized. Plus, Davao's runway is about 1,000 feet shorter than Cebu's. By the time the plane landed there would have been no brake pressure left. The speed would have been higher, and the result? Possibly far worse. So, the decision to not divert to Davao, which at the time seemed risky, might have been the very decision that saved every life on board. Because, had they diverted, the story of Flight 631 may not have been one of survival, but one of tragedy.